Hi everyone, my name is Jay, and today we're going to be talking about prokaryotes. If you have not already watched my video on eukaryotes, this might not make complete sense, so just pop over to that video before you watch this one. Alright, so let's get started. I'll start off with some basic vocabulary. A prokaryote is a cell that does not have a nucleus, and it lacks membrane-bound organelles. So, if you remember from the last video what a nucleus is, prokaryotes don't really have those. A prokaryote is very different structurally and very different functionally from eukaryotes. They're a lot simpler as they don't have the same amount of organelles or pathways. Prokaryotes are mostly bacteria, which are microscopic living organisms, usually single-celled, that can be found everywhere. Bacteria are often given a really bad connotation, but they are everywhere. The smell of fresh rain is bacteria. The smell of soil is bacteria. The cheese that you eat on your sandwiches is made by bacteria. While bacteria is given a bad name, it does a lot of good for the world too. Archaea are also prokaryotes, and archaea are microscopic living organisms that resemble bacteria but have distinct molecular characteristics that separate them from bacteria. So they kind of fall into this weird in-between where they are kind of like eukaryotes, but they're also not eukaryotes, and they are prokaryotes, but they're not really prokaryotes. They're part of the third domain of life, which is archaea, and it's believed that archaea led way to the evolution of eukaryotes, but scientists still aren't exactly sure where archaea fit in that sequence of events. Infectious, which means can cause disease and be transmitted. So when you have the flu, that's a disease that can be transmitted. Symbiotic, which means mutually beneficial relationship between organisms. The most common symbiotic relationship that we see, especially in like textbooks and things like that, is between a clownfish and an anemone. The anemone stings other fish but protects the clownfish, while the clownfish brings back things for the anemone to eat. So as I was talking about earlier with the tree of life, there's 3 domains in life, and that's going to be eukaryotes, archaea, and prokaryotes. So I kind of structured them the way that they are in comparison to each other. There's way more prokaryotes than there are eukaryotes, like just way more. This is a greater number. And there's more prokaryotes than archaea, but there's more archaea than eukaryotes. So what's the similarities between eukaryotes and prokaryotes? Well, first, we've got the cell wall, which, if you remember from the last video, is a rigid layer surrounding a membrane. They've also got ribosomes, which help with protein assembly by putting the pieces required to make protein together. And they have cytoplasm, the liquid inside of a cell that the organelles are held in. But if you remember from earlier, they don't have membrane-bound organelles. The cytoplasm is just kind of what's in between the organelles. It's not binding them into place like it would in a eukaryote. Something that's kind of similar, a kind of similar term, would be the cytoplasmic membrane. It's similar to a cell membrane in a eukaryote. So, like a eukaryote, especially an animal cell, bacteria have the ability to move and not be rigid like plant cells. They can stretch and shrink and do things like that because they are a living organism and they do have movement. So they have a cell membrane. It's not exactly a cell membrane because it doesn't have similar features, which you'll get further on into in cell biology and microbiology. But just know that the membrane for prokaryotes is not exactly the same as the membrane for eukaryotes. And then we've got some new terms. First, we've got the capsule, which is a layer surrounding the cell wall that provides protection from predators and drying out. So the capsule helps to protect the bacteria from something called desiccation. Desiccation is pretty much just a fancy word for drying out or losing water. Pili is a structure that allows bacteria to share information with other bacteria, and it can also be used to attach to a surface. So when a bacteria attaches to something, it uses its pili to kind of glue itself there. It gets stuck there. If you've ever seen like algae in a fish tank, you'll see that it's not floating around freely. It's really stuck to the glass. And a lot of the times you'll have to actually forcibly scrape it off. And that would be the pili attaching to the glass surface on that fish tank. And then we finally have the flagella, which is a tail that propels the bacteria and helps them to move. There are other things that help bacteria to move, but this is the most common. So the flagella is kind of like this cute little tail. It moves around in a circular motion, and a lot of bacteria will have multiple of them to kind of propel them in one direction. They're called flagella, and they're called flagella, and they're used for locomotion or movement. So bacteria, the good and the bad. So the good things, such as symbiotic relationships between us and bacteria, is that it aids in food digestion. It protects our intestines from bad bacteria, and it outcompetes more harmful bacteria. And the bad things, the infection, is illness. A lot of the times we'll see like bacterial meningitis and things like that. So bacteria can make you sick. They can cause inflammation, which causes immune system responses, and dental plaque. The reason you brush your teeth in the morning is because bacteria are starting to build up and they're capsulating themselves. So they're protecting themselves from both your toothbrush and drying out. So are bacteria bad? No. Are some bacteria bad? Most definitely. When we think of bacteria, we think a lot about antibiotics. Antibiotics are a medicine that helps stop the growth of bacteria or kills it. Common antibiotics include penicillin and amoxicillin. You might not exactly know what these are, but they're common household names. You may have even taken them at one point in your life. Penicillin and amoxicillin are commonly used to stop infection. Some bacteria become immune to the antibiotics we have. These bacteria are labeled as resistant. These bacteria have to be tested for resistances so doctors know what to prescribe. That's why sometimes when you're sick, doctors won't give you an antibiotic even though you're not feeling well. Not all illness is caused by bacteria, and not all bacteria respond to all antibiotics. So a common phrase that we're going to see a lot, which is the real pet peeve of a lot of scientists, is antibiotics cause bacteria to become resistant. No. That's not how that works. So I came up with an analogy. Let's think of it like scrubbing a pan. So we've got this really dirty pan. We had a lovely dinner, and now this pan is super dirty. I mean, super dirty. So let's wash it with some soap. Let's not scrub it. Let's just kind of let it sit out. We tip the water and the soap out, and it's a lot cleaner, but I wouldn't use it again. It's still got some grime on it. It's still dirty. The pan didn't become completely clean after rinsing it with soap and water. But is the dirty pan resistant to soap? No. These are just kind of stuck on a little bit better. Or maybe they're not oily enough for the soap to really attach to. So just because these little particles are still stuck to the pan doesn't mean that the soap didn't work. It just means they're attached really well. The use of antibiotics does not create a resistance, but it does reward resistance. That is why you have to take antibiotics even after you feel better. Let's think of the pan again. So let's think of the dirty pan as you being sick. You've got lots of germs, you're not feeling so hot. So let's wash the pan with some soap and have you take some antibiotics. You're starting to feel a lot better. And you know what? If you're really not paying attention, you might think you're completely better. The same way, if you're not paying completely attention, you might not scrub this pan out. You might think it's done. It's not completely clean, but it isn't as bad as it was before. But now let's take this almost clean pan and scrub it with a sponge, or finish out the course of antibiotics. And now we have a clean pan. Scrubbing it with a sponge and finishing out the antibiotics has allowed for these more stuck on pieces to be removed. Not all illnesses can be treated with antibiotics, though, as I said before. Viruses cannot be killed by these medications. That's why when you have the stomach bug or the flu, they can't really give you an antibiotic because it doesn't do anything to a virus, and a virus is what causes the flu. Unlike bacteria, viruses do not have a symbiotic relationship with us. While bacteria can benefit us, viruses cannot. So, we have bacteria in our guts, and we have bacteria on our skin that helps us keep healthy. But we don't have viruses like that. When a virus infects our bodies, they do make us sick, whereas sometimes bacteria don't make us sick, and they help us absorb our food and things like that. And finally, we get to the last domain of life, archaea. Archaea, unlike bacteria or viruses, cannot cause disease. There's never been a reported case of archaea causing disease. Archaea typically live in environments other organisms cannot survive in, such as geothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean or hot springs. These archaea are called extremophiles, while they live in otherwise uninhabited environments. Despite similarities, archaea actually share more structures and pathways with eukaryotes. So, like I said, they're their own domain of life, but they lean more towards eukaryotes than prokaryotes. So, there's some basic prokaryote information as well as some information on the domain of life.